We have more than 1,200 registered participants. It is more than the capacity of our Zoom account, so our sincere apologies for those who can't enter the Zoom room. Hence, we also set up a live stream option via YouTube. Hello all who watch this from YouTube. I hope the YouTube is already alive now. You can all say hi to each other by writing down your name, your organization, and which city you are from in the chat box, so we know that where you are coming from. I'm Lia Zakia, the program coordinator of CAIPSDCC. CAIPSDCC is a collaborative Australia-Indonesia programs on sustainable development and climate change. It is a collaboration between Griffith University Australia and Universitas Indonesia, along with some other universities in Indonesia, such as Universitas Hasanuddin in Makassar. The collaboration has several components. The first component is a research collaboration on climate change and sustainable development. We focus on the 4 themes. The first one, the impacts of climate change on planetary and human health. Second one, sustainable landscape management. The third one, energy transition and carbon pricing. And then the fourth one, increasing the resilience of small islands in eastern Indonesia. This research collaboration component aims at enhancing the science to policy principle. Therefore, we have included various stakeholders to the research, national and local governments, private sectors, NGOs, and communities. The second component is the capacity building. The third one is the student mobility between Australia and Indonesia, a little bit tricky at the moment, but we'll try our best. And the fourth one is the high-level dialogues and a series of webinars. Today's event is under this component. Now I'd like to explain some housekeeping rules to make sure that we have an enjoyable session and a meaningful discussion. The participants don't have to fill in any attendance list, so you don't have to worry. We will have attendance report from Zoom, so you can only just focus on the materials. You can write down your questions in the Q&A box, not the chat, the Q&A box. We usually receive a lot of questions. It is challenging for us to answer all, but we will do our best. Make sure that you read the existing questions first before you write down your own, just in case it has similarity with yours. Then you can just upvote it by clicking the thumbs up icon. We encourage everyone to see all the questions and then just click the one that you like the most so that we can have information of which question is the most popular one. For YouTube viewers, don't worry, you can also write down your questions. Our team will move it to the Q&A box in the Zoom to ensure that it can be seen by other participants at Zoom to be upvoted. The chair will focus on the most popular questions with the most upvote or the most relevant to the discussions at that moment. The presentation materials can be downloaded in our Google Drive account. We will share the link at the end of this webinar, so don't worry. Information about the request for certificates will be shared in the end of the webinar, so stay tuned. We also conduct poll today, so I hope all of you can participate by answering the question and we will share the result later. Bapak, Ibu, ladies and gentlemen, before we start the discussions, let's hear the opening remarks from Prof. Yatna Supriyatna. Prof. Yatna is the Director of the Institute for Sustainable Earth and Resources, or ISER, Universitas Indonesia. He finished his Master of Science and doctorate degree from the University of New Mexico in the USA, plus pre- and postdoctoral at Columbia University in New York. He was assigned by Government of Indonesia to be a member of Indonesia government delegation to many conferences, such as Conventional of Biological Diversity, World Conservation Union or IUCN meeting, UNFCCC and its sub-TTA, and UN Forest Forum in New York. He's recently active in climate change policy and research, especially on REDD+ policy and implementation. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me to welcome Prof. Yatna. Prof. Yatna, monggo. Oh. Still trying to unmute the mic of Prof. Yatna. We still can't hear you and see you.
Can you unmute the?
Okay. Yeah, your mic is already unmuted, but we still can't see you. Great.
All right.
There you go.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Leah. Distinguished guests, college and Ladies and gentlemen, good morning to you all. On behalf of CAIPSDCC, I warmly welcome to all of you on the 12th webinar, the impact of pandemic on low carbon development. I would like to express University of Indonesia deep appreciation to the Griffith University and also to all the participants, especially the webinar panelists. Here we have, of course, Pak Dida Gardera, Pak Paul Butarbutar, Dr. John Henderson, Hewson, also Dr. Rob Hales. Thank you. Also, of course, Madam Cookie Shua Jasman for making this happen. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me start with what is the low carbon development? Why is that very important? Because, of course, we are going to hear more from the panelists. But let me start with what we had last year when we had COP25 in Madrid. So there are many things that I believe that during the Madrid meeting, I think that one of those is I think they encourage us and not only the countries but also non-state actors to share best practice to motivate uh, highly determined contribution or NDC to keep the global temperature only 1.5 degrees instead of 2 degrees, as reflected by the Paris Agreement. I think that is very important, and that can be done if we are practicing low carbon development. As we know that the impact of the climate change occurring, and in fact that is increasing severity and frequencies. So I believe that all nations are vulnerable, especially Indonesia with 17,000 islands, more vulnerable and less resilience. And this situation, of course, that need to be more investment and discussion. We have been the 12th webinar and we have been discussing many of those, including the resiliencies, including the pandemic itself. But today it's very important because we're combining that. Not only we are discussing about the pandemic, not only discussing about the climate change, but how that the climate change intervene with the pandemics. The ideas of making that low carbon development happen, whether that will be hampered by this pandemic or whether that will be keep stronger, because we can hear this Pak Dida as the Assistant Deputy of Minister from Minister of Economic Affairs. We're going to be discussing about that. But also we're going to hear the expert from Pak Butarbutar, of course, the person who has been doing many things on the climate change and low carbon development. And also, of course, we can hear the Dr. John Henderson, who's coming from the private sector. That will be very important, how that view on this low carbon. And last but not least, of course, Rob Hales, my colleagues from Griffith University, from the business enterprise, but also the scientists who's doing many economic valuation and so on. I think this is, I believe this Madam's chair, Ibu Kuki Sujahman, this will be making discussion will be more fruitful for this participant, the 12 of webinar of KFDCC. Thank you very much. Let's hear for the next good discussion.
Thank you very much, Pak Yatna. So Pak Yatna is one of the leads of CAIPSDCC from Universitas Indonesia. So we're happy to have him here now. So moving on, now it's time for me to introduce the chair for our today's webinar, which is Ibu Kuki Suyamun or Mukti Handayani Suyamun, but no one knows her real name. So let's just call her Mbak Kuki. So she was a former colleague of mine and in the Office of the President Special Envoy for Climate Change. She's the former assistant to the Special Envoy. She is a senior climate negotiator for the Indonesian government and co-lead negotiator for Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. She graduated from the Department of Environmental Engineering, Institut Teknologi Bandung, and pursued her study at the Environmental Engineering and Sustainable Infrastructure Program at the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm. She has previously held the position of the Executive Director of Pelangi Indonesia, a non-government organization. From 2013 to 2015, Kuki served as secretary to the Working Group of International Negotiation for the National Council on Climate Change. Mbak Kuki also active in leading a division for emission reduction and carbon market in METI, the Indonesia Renewable Energy Society. I hope it's correct. And then also together with coordinating working group on climate change in the Alumni Association of Environmental Engineering of ITB or Institut Teknologi Bandung. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me to welcome Mbak Kuki.
Thank you. Thank you, Leah, for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon to colleague in Australia, and also good whatever the time is in your time zone, because I know that there are also people from any other part of the world. So welcome to our session today. And we are lucky that we got 4 resource persons. Yeah, unfortunately, they are all men, but I think it's not. The issue is not whether you have men or women, but the issue is what is it at stakes that we need to talk about. Okay, so without further ado, I would like to invite the first speaker, our first speaker for today, which is Pak Dida Gardera. Pak Dida is currently the Assistant Deputy Minister for Agro, Pharmacy and Tourism at the Coordinating Ministry for Economic Affairs. Before this, I think this is just a very recent position that Pak Dida has. Before this, Pak Dida is also the Assistant Deputy at the same ministry, but at that time he was leading the issue on environment conservation. And before that, Pak Dida was part of the Ministry of Environment and Forestry. And so Pak Dida has a very long experience in the issue of environment and of course, including the issue of low carbon future or low carbon development. Pak Dida finished his study from the Institut Teknologi Bandung. Pak Dida is my junior though, at the Environmental Engineering of ITB, and he also finished his master from the London School of Economics and Political Science. So without further ado, I would like to call upon Pak Dida. Pak Dida, you have maximum 7 minutes to share your views. Please, Pak Dida.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Mbak Kuki, Prof. Jatna, Kathleen, Prof. Health, Mr. Paul, and Dr. John for inviting me in this very precious event. Allow me to share some screen. Just yesterday, we announced the economic growth of Indonesia for the second quarter. Same like other country, we have negative economic growth for the second quarter, minus 5.32. So, but we're still optimistic in the third quarter, we will rebound the economic. So to cope with the impact of the COVID-19, we have three strategy. First, the exit strategy program, what many people call new normal order. We have to prioritize the health aspect. The second one, we have a program to recover the economic with focus on micro and small and medium enterprise, but also we still support the medium and large corporations. And the second one, we prepare also the economic transformation through our bill called job creation, or Indonesia Cipta Kerja. So the impact of this pandemic will affect to the five aspects. First, of course, the health. We already suffer, but we survive with the pandemic. The second one, social. So we do our daily activities similar what we do right now. We more often using the virtual apparatus. And the third one, through the economy. That's we still do all government can do to recover our economic. Of course, the health aspect still our priority. The requirement to do all the economy. The fourth one, and hopefully not affects too much to the financial sectors. We already strengthened our financial institutions, and luckily some new credit already disbursed through our banks and other financial institutions as well. And the last one, of course, this is with relevant to our discussion today, will affect to the climate change budget. But if we see the price of oil is getting higher now, so if the price of oil is very low, so this is not conducive to other option to renewable energy. But right now, the price of oil similar with the price in 2017, for example. So I think there is no excuse. We have to still commit to implement renewable energy, including in Indonesia. But of course, we have to inline because we have still lack of electricity provision. Just a week ago, with my colleagues from National Planning Agency, Ministry of Finance, we discussed how to re-mainstream low carbon development, and we are agree to optimize the economic recovery program. Already mentioned some of the green program or green development program, but not explicitly. They are include in some other program, for example, with the small and medium enterprise recovery program. So this low carbon funding will have two channel, direct and indirect. whether direct to business sector, to society, and indirect through our budget. For example, like to cope with deforestation and reforestation. We have already initial discussion with my colleagues. We have comprised the strategy for short term, medium term, and long term. How to pre-mainstream the budget for green development or low carbon development, including to optimize the role of environment fund agency, or we call just environment fund. Hopefully, through this, we can optimize all the source of funding to fund the green activity. Last one, we want to talk our discussion. First, of course, the COVID pandemic will affect to all our aspect of life, but we can cope with this situation. We believe we can bounce back the economic growth. We have to have built a very solid team, not only the government, but with all stakeholders. We will optimize all the channel to fund the low carbon development, including environment fund, and government of Indonesia, particularly Ministry of Environment and Forestry, initiate to make carbon pricing regulation. So with this, we can also accelerate all activities related to low carbon development. I think that's all that I want to say. Thank you. Back to Mbak Kuki.
Thank you so much, Pak Dida. It's really like in time. So you even only use like 6 minutes out of 7. Okay, thank you. And I would like all the participants to share their views and also questions if they have in the Q&A box. So I would like now to invite Pak Paul Butarbutar. Pak Paul Butarbutar is currently the Executive Director of Indonesian Renewable Energy Society, or METI in Bahasa Indonesia, Masyarakat Energi Terbarukan Indonesia. He has a very long experience in different issues in energy, especially in renewable energy, but also on carbon issues. So Pak Paul has been dealing with greenhouse gases emission reduction projects, including CDM, verified carbon standard, social carbon, and all the carbon things. And also currently actively involved in investment in renewable energy projects in different regions. Also helping in securing, deal reviewing the technical, environmental, and social, and also, of course, financial aspect of investment, especially for renewable energy. So I think I would just like to invite Pak Paul to share your views, Pak. Please, Pak Paul.
Thank you very much, Cookie, for the introduction. And also thank to organizer of the event that invite me to this very important discussion. I'm very honored to be inspired. I would like to share my screen actually, but please allow me to share it. Okay. So I guess I also have about 7 minutes to share my view, and
yes,
I would like to start with these slides. This is our national energy policy as already established in government regulation number 979 2014, mandating that by 2025 we need to have 23% of renewable in our energy mix. And so we are now 2020, and it is about 5 years to come, and we are still having only 9.15% of renewable in the energy mix. Then we need to work really hard to make it happen. As we see, for example, from international news that COVID has influenced has a very bad impact on energy, especially on coal, gas, oil, but the only energy that still make progress, that's actually renewables. And the main reason is because in most of the world, they have kind of merit order by prioritizing the renewable energy in their operation. We see, for example, these pictures how the transportation reduced significantly, the same with the electricity consumption in all of the world. And we see, for example, in China start already, because they have the COVID case earlier, but they recovered now. And we can see that also from the transportation and also in the electricity consumption, although has not been back to the previous years. And the important part from for us is actually we see at 2020 the emission reduction fall by 5% in Q1 2020 compared to Q1 2019, and this is a kind of good news. And if we see the impact in Indonesia, this is the peak demand in Indonesia. For example, in Sumatra, we see the reduction also in the consumptions. We see as well in Java, in almost all part of Indonesia, and Java is mostly hit by COVID, especially because of there are lower demand especially in commercial and industry. But if we see the impact on the renewable in Indonesia, we have seen, for example, that due to the restriction that we call it PSBB here, it leads to the higher construction cost. Then there is limitation of the mobilization of worker and delay in financial drawdown, and then this would lead to the delay in the commercial operation date. And then we have experienced also that due to the COVID, then the procurement of renewable has been postponed. There was already, let's say, a kind of a call for proposal issued last time, but now it was delayed. And also we have seen that even the PLN business plan has not been issued up to now. Normally it was issued in March, but as up to now, we don't have it yet. So what is important for us actually post-COVID-19? We have seen in globally that there is a limited funding available now for coal power plant or fossil-based power plant, but more and more funding available for renewable energy. And then we also see that in Indonesia, government plan to close down coal power plant and combined cycle power plant that are older than 20 years, and diesel power plant older than 15 years, and it makes about 13 gigawatt in total about. And then as part of the government program 35 gigawatt, there are still projects in the planning and in procurement that we have proposed last time. For example, why don't you just replace that with renewable energy? You still have your 35 gigawatt, but replace that partially with renewable energy. So what we have proposed to the government for the post COVID-19 as a kind of economic recovery, the main objective should be, let's say, creating new jobs through investment in renewable energy, focusing, for example, or starting with the small and micro scale renewable energy in remote area. We propose, for example, on PV and biomass, because, for example, in biomass, if we, let's say, do or implement biomass project in remote areas, micro project, let's say 30, 100 or 200 kilowatt, and then there is opportunity for local community also to be involved in supply chain. So they would receive, for example, let's say, payment for providing the feedstock. We have already a case in the Mentawai, where as part of the MCA project, that the local community has been also involved in the supply chains for the biomass provision. And then we have proposed, for example, as well, that government also to complement the government plan, we say that okay, why don't PLN, for example, replace all diesel genset that has been used by PLN in remote area, replace that with biomass or PV or other, let's say, locally available renewable energy project. And then for that purpose, government put a kind of, let's say, provide investment to PLN. So penyertaan modal negara, PMN. It will help, let's say, reducing the carbon footprint of Indonesia. And then one very important issue that's now being prepared by government is actually the presidential regulations on renewable energy tariff. We expect that the issuance of this regulation will unlock a lot of opportunity for renewable energy investment. We understand that one of the main issue there is actually in the planning, that it has to prioritize renewable energy. Also in the operation, it will be also the merit order will be renewable as priority, and then there will be bankability issues in the regulation, that, for example, that the PPA to be developed later on has to be bankable for project financing.
Paul, you
Yes.
have one minute left.
Yes, yeah. This is I have the other slides, but important as well is, let's say, creating new demand for example, new electric vehicles or electric cooker, or mandating renewable energy utilizations in specific economic zone, implementing renewable energy portfolio standard, and establishment of renewable energy fund. I would like to highlight this slide. This is my last slide about the jobs for renewable energy development. We see, for example, if we want to develop geothermal project, 60 megawatt basis, for example, for the preparation alone, we will need about more than 1,000 people. And for the construction, we will need 3,000, more than 3,000. So thinking about if, for example, as a follow-up of the regulation to be issued, we build, let's say, hundreds, 200s, or 300s projects, then how many jobs that will be created with this renewable energy investment? So actually, we have put a kind of matrix together, what could be done by the government in order to, let's say, move towards low carbon economy in the renewable energy sector. We could share it later on if needed. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Paul. Apology because of the time limitation that we have, but definitely it will be interesting to see your matrix later during the discussion as well. So now I would like to call upon Dr. John Hewson, that has had several careers in academia, bureaucracy, business, politics, and as well as the media. He is currently a professor in the Crawford School of Public Policy at ANU, and an adjunct professor at Curtin, UTS Canberra, and Griffith Universities. Having been professor and head of the School of Economics at UNSW, and Professor of Management and Dean of Macquarie Graduate School of Management at Macquarie University. He has worked for the Australian Treasury, the IMF, the Reserve Bank, the UN, UNSCAP, and the ADB, and often advises senior public servants. He is also the chair, which is on his capacity now, of the Business Council for Sustainable Development in Australia. So, John, you have 7 minutes for sharing your views. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Cookie. It's an honour to be here and to be part of this presentation today. COVID's obviously a big shock to the Australian economy, as it is to the global economy. We are seeing, in terms of dealing with the spread of the virus, we now have a second wave of the virus in Victoria, which is breaking previous records, if you like. So it's quite difficult to get a sense of just how much economic and social damage has been done. But generally, we're expecting quite a significant fall in economic activity, the largest, I think, since the Great Depression in the course of this year. Although, as I say, with a wave unfolding in Victoria, it's hard to get a number on that. The unemployment rate has risen from about 5.3 to around 11% now, and it's somewhere in the teens. So a very significant challenge for government at this time, both state and federal government, to respond to the COVID crisis. And my own fear is that we will have a series of waves of this crisis that come and go until actually a vaccine is developed. Big impact on our domestic economy, big impact on industry in general, but also in particular, I think, because we've had to close our external border effectively, very big impact on international tourism, which was a major export industry for Australia, and significant impact on education, a very heavy dependence of our university sector and some schools and so on foreign students. And of course, the economy's growth over most of the post-war period has been underwritten by immigration, and the immigration numbers, of course, have been reduced dramatically. So three big negatives in terms of industrial and business impact and broader significance to the Australian community. So COVID is a shock. Obviously, we weren't ready for it, and I don't think most of the world was. But it is an opportunity to stop and think about what we do and how we do it and why we do it. I've been impressed by how much change people have made in their behaviour, businesses made in this behaviour, governments has made in its behaviour as a response to COVID. I mean, very significant shifts in the way we work and where we work and how we work, whether we travel, and in a lot of lifestyle, indeed, what we eat and so on. A lot of very significant change very quickly. So it's encouraging that the community can make such change so quickly. And that gives me great encouragement that now we have an opportunity in the midst of the COVID crisis to say, okay, how do we recover? The recovery strategy becomes fundamentally important in this respect. It's an opportunity in Australia's case to have a look at our industrial structure, to look at how we could perhaps reset manufacturing in our country, look at what we'll do with the inevitable slow growth, if any growth, in our education, our higher education, university sector, and in, of course, in tourism, international tourism, but a significant shift to domestic tourism and so on. These are opportunities that exist. And of course, in the context of climate change, I mean, it's a very real opportunity, I think, to accelerate the process to a low carbon Australia, let's say by 2050. And most of the states in Australia have actually now signed up to an objective of net zero emissions by 2050. That says, okay, what can we do to achieve that? We should be able to work sector by sector and see what needs to be done to achieve that sort of objective. And it's against the background, of course, globally, that unless the world halves its emissions by 2030, it won't get anywhere near the Paris commitments by 2050, and that's way above, of course, net zero emissions by 2050. An enormous task about which there should be a very urgent response, and I think the COVID pandemic gives us the opportunity to make that response. The way I look at it is we move from sector to sector. We look at the power sector, a big transition in Australia to rooftop solar, for example, and large-scale solar projects, wind projects. We have a number of hydro projects. but we can accelerate the process quickly towards 100% renewables by the mid-2030s if we wish. Accelerate the closure of coal-fired power stations. So in that sector, the pathway is pretty clear. It's just a question of accelerating the pace of that transition. In the transport sector, I mean, the transition to electric vehicles and autonomous trucking and so on is a very real opportunity and a very real challenge, but a lot of planning would be involved in actually making that transition. In agriculture, we have a problem in Australia of droughts, of course, regular droughts driven by climate to a large extent. And because we're a hot, dry climate, we are seeing droughts of increasing intensity and severity coming more frequently, in fact. So in those terms, we want to look at what we can do in agriculture to make our soils more drought resistant, more resilient. And that involves pretty simple changes in farming technologies to sort of improve the carbon content of the soil, moving from chemical fertilizers to organic fertilizers, shallow tilling the soil, worrying about land clearing, rotating crops with animals and so on. But we can do a lot, and that sector could be net negative emissions in terms of its contribution to the process. And the farmers, of course, by generating carbon credits, would have another income stream. And then we could go on to the building sector and what we do to build green buildings and industrial processes and so on. What I'm saying is a sector by sector approach is a real possibility. And the focus today in Australia is, of course, the government keeps repeating, we want jobs, more jobs, even more jobs, jobs and growth. And the best way to do that is to start some of these new industries, some of these new businesses, and accelerate the pace of change. We haven't had that sort of attitude in this country for a long time. I've been involved in the climate debate actively since the early 1990s. We've lost a couple of decades in terms of bad government policy, no leadership, a lot of point scoring from one party to the other, rather than getting on and developing a national energy policy, a national transition strategy, and so on. So in those circumstances, the challenge is very real. The opportunities are very great. And of course, we have some particular problems. There's a lot of waste in Australia. And for a long time, governments were able to export that waste. And now, of course, China and other countries, I think including Indonesia, are not taking waste anymore. So we have to think about recycling. We have to think about circular economy opportunities, whether it's biomass, turning just about any sort of waste. I look at it from green waste and sewage and household garbage and industrial waste and so on, can all be turned into electricity or to biofuels or to ethanol or bioplastics. The technologies exist. The waste is distributed right across Australia. So the regional possibilities are very significant, as I'm sure they are in Indonesia as well. So in those circumstances, you can solve a waste problem. At the same time, you can reduce emissions. At the same time, you can increase investment and you can increase jobs. Similarly, we are very heavily dependent on imported fuel. We don't have fuel security in Australia. About 30 or 40 days of fuel in total. We have the opportunity to make a transition to a lower carbon fuel, to biofuels, driven, I think, by international agreements on what's going to happen in the aviation sector with avgas, what's going to happen in the marine sector. They've both made big commitments to 50% reduction in emissions by 2050. So the context is a really good one for making a transition. As tough as the COVID has been, and the big shock that that's brought to us, the opportunities it implies in terms of resetting the Australian economy and taking advantage of the opportunities for new growth and new jobs and new investment, I think they're very real. Did I make it, Cookie?
Yes. Thank you so much. So it's exactly 7 minutes. Thanks so much, John. There are quite a lot of information that you have shared with us, and I think there will be a lot of questions also for clarification and for further information from you. But now I would like to come to our last speaker for today, but definitely he will also share a lot of information with us. So I would like to call upon Dr. Rob Hales. He's currently the director of the Griffith Center for Sustainable Enterprise. And he has been working with his team to achieve the sustainability goals of the Griffith Business School in the areas of sustainability research, teaching and learning for sustainability, the school's sustainable operation and engagement with sustainable enterprises and business community. His research interests focus on social science issues in a range of contexts, including climate change, green economy, sustainable tourism, outdoor recreation, social movement studies, and indigenous studies. Rob has completed a wide range of research projects for state governments and national research organizations such as National Climate Change Adaptation Research Facility. So now I would like to call upon Rob. You also have 7 minutes to share your views, Rob, please.
Thanks very much. Just checking you can hear me.
Yes.
Great. Yeah, thanks very much for the opportunity to talk today. And it's great coming after John Hewson, giving a fantastic overview of the Australian state of play. So at Griffith University, we have a large group of people looking at climate change research. So what I thought I'd do today is give you a bit of a perspective, from my perspective, on the trends that we're seeing, the drivers of climate change, given that we have the imperative of low carbon development, low carbon future. So if we go to the next slide, just to acknowledge the traditional owners on which the land we now stand in Australia, and hope to work across many nations. I hope we all work towards reconciliation with Indigenous people. Today, I'll be talking about the next 7 points. There seems to be some drivers of climate change and low carbon futures. We heard from John in Australia that climate change policy hasn't necessarily met the requirements in terms of the higher standards of policy, national policy. But in Australia, we also have our states, and at present, we have all of the states with a zero emissions target. Net zero emissions by 2050 under the Paris Agreement. So we do have all of Australia covered in terms of state commitments, which is quite significant. And also it's quite significant that we have ACT government now is completely renewable energy, run on renewable energy, and that includes powering our Parliament House as well. So there may be a bit of irony in that. Another bit of work in terms of policy. So there is a sort of a subnational or polycentric approach to climate change. And also there are many climate emergency declarations occurring throughout the world. The first climate change declaration was down in Melbourne in a local council there, and that started that trend. And since then, we've had a large number of people subscribing to that climate emergency from an organisational perspective. Recently, I've been involved in science-based targets work, looking at why companies engage with zero emission targets. And that's with a collaboration with World Wildlife Fund. So thank you very much for that collaboration. And the interesting thing here is that even though companies tended to want to have that zero emissions pathway, it tended to be driven not by a desire to go down the zero emissions path, but it was linked and probably driven more so by carbon risk, mainly through a lot of the work with Task Force for Climate-related Disclosures. That work seems to be quite pivotal in changing large organisations in which they see carbon risk, and obviously that relates to stranded assets. Clean energy is the other thing in terms of price deflation. I saw some comments come up here. We'll have a look at that in a minute. But in terms of costs are decreasing, but that's also juxtaposed beside decreasing price of fuel, so therefore, or carbon-based fuels. So therefore, we've got a tenuous and tricky situation in there in terms of where that's going to drive things. And linked to that price deflation is decentralisation. So decentralisation sounds like it could be easy, but because we have asset management issues, we have a large amount of lock-in in present coal-fired power stations and the grid. One of the things that COVID has done is to provide us a little bit of a window of what clean air might look like if we take cars off the road and decrease industrial production. So I think there will be a trend here in wanting the consumers, people out there, citizens actually wanting clean air, and not necessarily from an amenity point of view, but there's also the economic argument because of the massive impact that carbon pollution has on our health. There's also the idea of demand destruction. What do consumers think during this time? And one of the things also here that is reflecting in the markets is that if we look at sustainability organisations, if we look at the indexes on sustainability organisations, you can see that they're outperforming companies that have high carbon emitting industries or high carbon emitting associations. So we're seeing a bit of a structural shift in the market here already, and that's been noted by many people in this sustainability area. The other aspect to mention here is deglobalization, the new global local agenda, supply chain almost overnight nationalization, and also challenging trade agreements and how that's going to play out. Now, one of the things here is the next thing, and the last point I'll make here is the Paris Agreement, and it will provide a bit of breathing space, so to speak. And we have some time, depending on which way the USA election goes, what will happen after the election in terms of the commitments with USA to the Paris Agreement. And I will say here another point about carbon markets, irrespective of what happens with the USA, because it's very instructive as to where the world is going despite national agreements. Talking with colleagues from Indonesia who are on the panel at the COP last year and also the year before, looking at carbon markets, and it seems like there is a driving force in regional carbon markets occurring, and also even in places like Australia that doesn't have a carbon market, well, it has a semi or quasi carbon market. There's still a massive demand in the voluntary sector for looking at carbon offsets and the management of carbon. So I think that those trends that I've outlined here are very critical in terms of understanding whether we will actually go to a low carbon future or not. There's probably a few other issues that we could bring up and discuss in the questions. But like John said, the currency for politicians, particularly in Australia, are jobs. So there have been a number of organisations such as the Global Compact and also the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, outlining how you can actually recover and be sustainable and have a low carbon future at the same time. And there are many organisations lobbying for that at present in Australia. But because of the second wave and potentially thinking about what waves might happen after this, there is a lot of energy directed in terms of mitigation of the virus itself, at the same time as thinking about the recovery. So I think there's an opportunity still with the second wave happening in Australia to have some time for policymakers and various interest groups to have their voice heard in what sort of recovery we will have. And that, from my perspective, hopefully goes down a low carbon future.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Rob. Yeah, so we have heard from all the speakers for this morning session. And in the Q&A box, I already got quite a lot of questions. So I'll try to address them to the speakers one by one, and hopefully we can get the response from all speakers as needed. I need to check whether Pak Dida is already around.
Yes, he's back.
Okay, thank you so much, Pak Dida, because Pak Dida was very busy doing a number of things at the same time. But thank you so much, Pak Dida. So I think there is one question that is quite interesting and got a lot of thumb up, which is The question is from Pak Warif. Indonesia's Low Carbon Development Initiative, or LCDI, by Bappenas has been announced March 2019, and it has a high scenario target of 43% carbon emission drop by 2030. Other than stopping the COVID-19 pandemic, what policy must the government apply to reach the LCDI 2030 target? But I think this 43% target is for the very, with the, I couldn't remember what is the term now, but with additional investment and alternative financing. But I think I would like to invite Pak Dida to respond to this before I come to Pak Paul, and then maybe Rob and John would like also to add to the response. So Pak Dida, please. You haven't unmute your microphone, Pak Dida.
Oh yeah, okay, sorry. Yeah, thank you for the questions. Already mentioned in my presentation. Of course, with this pandemic, we have to adjust our target. We still discuss on this, but we are still very high commitment for doing the low carbon development already in our medium term planning. But yeah, about the number of the targets, hopefully within 1 to this 1-2 months, we can conclude the numbers. Yeah, that's and the policy we still continue our policy. What our literally explicit in our NDC, we still continue working with all the line ministries. So I think, yeah, we still continue. So not only the carbon emission reduction target, but of course all the targets in our economic still on process. We have to determine the numbers. Yeah.
Pak Paul, you want to add to that?
Yeah, to reach this 43%, that's actually really very ambitious target, I would say, but it is doable. But how? So in the energy sector, I think one of the important thing that need to be implemented by the government is the so-called carbon pricing instrument. If we, for example, implement a kind of emission trading or let's say a carbon tax, it will help in moving or converting the let's say fossil-based energy towards the renewable. But also it has to be combined with the massive investment in renewable energy. We have, as part of our proposal, for example, we have said that if government would like to meet this target, the main issue is how to create favorable conditions for investment in renewable energy. Issuing a kind of renewable energy law, for example, which is now being, let's say, discussed in the parliament, will help a lot facilitating the investment in renewable energy. One of the several issues that is already included in the draft renewable energy law is this, let's say, promoting or prioritizing the use of renewable energy, the merit order, and then financing establishment of the renewable energy financing. If we have that, if we have, for example, let's say, financing from the establishment of the renewable energy fund, it can be used to incentivize the renewable energy investment. It can incentivize the, let's say, the fossil-based energy to move towards renewable energy. We have thought, for example, about the why don't we, for example, incentivize the coal power plant use, let's say, developers to move or to reduce the capacity by giving them opportunity to invest in renewable energy. So instead of just closing down, it might not be, let's say, it will be too costly. I read today, for example, the effort that has been done by government in Germany, that they would provide a kind of incentive to close down coal power plant. But in Indonesia, I think we should not providing incentive to close down, but instead of them providing incentive for them to move from or reducing the capacity but replacing it with 43% is achievable by 2030, but it has to be government has to implement a kind of let's say combination of policies. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Pak Paul. Is anyone, John or Rob, want to add to that? I know that this is asking for the Indonesian government side, but as expert, maybe both of you, John and Rob, has some point to share. John?
Thank you, Cookie. Look, as an economist, I've got to say that the basis of the transition should be an effective market price on carbon. And as pure a emissions trading scheme as you can get with public auctions and so on is the way to go. It's not necessarily the total solution, but once you get a price on carbon, and the coal-fired power stations, for example, have to pay a penalty for polluting the atmosphere, or car manufacturers for polluting the atmosphere with dirty fuel, and the fuel companies and so on, you will change the move very quickly. We had a limited carbon price experience in Australia. It wasn't really a market price, it was set by regulation, but it did impact on emissions, and it impacted quite quickly. And it was a bit of a tragedy that for short-term political reasons that got undone, and the mechanism was scrapped. But I think that's the basis of the transition. And once you do that, you'll get an accelerated closure of coal-fired power stations. The idea that Paul has given, which is to give an incentive to transition from coal-fired power to renewables, makes a lot of sense. And some of them are doing it. We've had one company in Australia, AGL, which had a coal-fired power station which closed, Liddell, closed early, and refused to try and extend its life, and made the statement that, look, we can easily replace the 1,000 megawatts from there with renewable energy. And they were simultaneously investing already without incentive into solar farms and so on to meet that gap. And that's really what can happen. Once you get a framework from government within which those sort of price signals can work, you'll make a very fast transition. Then you can add to that various other things you wish, like you can have a structure to accelerate the closure of coal-fired power stations. You can have a structure that facilitates the development of biofuels and alternatives to petrol and oil and so on. These things can be done relatively easily. Once you set the framework, it will happen. With the incentives, I should say, it will happen.
Sure. Thanks so much. Rob, you have anything to add? Please.
Yeah, just to add very quickly to John's comments there about a carbon market. There's also smart ways in which to do that. I remember about a year ago, the Canadian opposition proposing in the carbon market area that instead of penalising polluters and that going to a fund or leaving that company, but you actually internalise that money so that they would spend that on their own investment in renewable energy. So in terms of the carbon price, it's actually not a cost, but it's a forced approach to reinvest within that company. So there are smart ways in which you can tinker with the carbon market. And it's that smart approach, I think, which is going to get it over the line in countries like Australia, which so far in the last few years haven't been very amenable to a carbon market.
Okay, thanks so much, Rob. So the first question was about Indonesia. The second question is about Australia, though. So I will address this one to both John and Rob then. The question is coming from the YouTube from Pak Rahmat Witular. How does Australia synchronize or implement low carbon national policy amongst the major stakeholders, and in particular with different states? So I know this is quite difficult question, but I'm sure you can answer that. So please, John.
Well, the answer is we haven't had much of that coordination so far. Although, as both Rob and I have said, the states have made a commitment now to net zero emissions by 2050. And they are competing in a sense with each other to accelerate the process towards that in their own state. They're looking at various schemes to actually achieve that outcome. And we have, in the COVID context, had the establishment of what the Prime Minister's called a national cabinet, but it has provided a mechanism by which the states and the federal government can actually work together in the resolution of certain challenges, as they've done with COVID, or indeed in terms of the recovery phase. And what I'm hearing from the states is that they're going to try and use that forum to accelerate some of these arguments. They want a national energy strategy and energy policy. It's not the sort of thing you should be doing state by state. And I think that provides a framework within which that sort of transition can occur. And if they agree on the way in which that would be done, and we get away from the unproductive sort of political point scoring that has dominated our last couple of decades of climate debate in Australia, I think that it's a way forward. But, and in that, of course, the stakeholders, the broader community has already moved. I mean, the private sector has been moving. We've got a world record level, I think, of household solar panels per capita. They're the biggest rollout of household solar panels. We've had a lot of businesses commit to renewable energy by certain dates, 2025, 2030. We're finding a lot of transition work being done company by company. I mean, just give an example quickly. I was on the board of a printing company about 15 years, 20 years ago. I said, why don't we look at our carbon footprint? And everyone thought I was mad. All the directors said, why would we want to do that? And I said, well, let's get an independent assessment of the carbon footprint, because printing uses a lot of electricity, a lot of power, and a lot of logistics, a lot of transport. And that assessment showed that if we just changed the use of them, don't fire anybody, don't cancel anything, just change the use of power and transport, we could cut the cost base of the company by 25 or 30%. Suddenly it was a much more profitable business, and I was a genius. And that's what they're doing. They're working it out, that actually it doesn't need to cost. It can be to your benefit to think about what you do and the way you do it. And I think business is doing that now on a grand scale. And Rob mentioned the World Business Council for Sustainable Development has a number of projects and plans working towards that sort of transition to a lower carbon business community. And we're seeing some of the big energy groups, BP, for example, wrote off $25 billion worth of its asset base. That has led to a significant acceleration of the response in the gas and oil sectors, I think, to the reality that transition is going to take place, and they need to reposition themselves in a more effective way.
Rob?
Yeah, I think one of the things I've noticed in the last couple of years engaging with Indonesia, and we could talk about Australia for a while here, but one of the things that I've been impressed is the central planning and the long-term approach that Indonesia has in their policy making. And I think one of the things that COVID-19, the coronavirus pandemic, is going to do is start to think about businesses have to think long-term about continuity planning, which wasn't necessarily part of their mainstay of business operations, or business planning. And governments also need to think a little bit more long-term. And that's one of the things I've always been impressed about when coming over to Indonesia and learning what centralized planning is happening in Indonesia.
Can I say I agree with that? I recall the old Churchill quote that plans don't matter, it's planning that's important. And we don't do any of that in Australia. We don't have any long-term strategic thinking, and that is the major constraint, whereas Indonesia is very impressive in that respect. And you do work towards those planning objectives. And it is a way of bringing, to answer Kuki's question, the stakeholders together in a common cause, as COVID has done.
All right. Thanks so much. So I think the next question, I would like to address it to everyone. This question is, in fact, aligned also with a number of questions. It has a lot to do with the economic consideration. It has a lot to do with the current situation. How do stakeholders, policymakers, academia, as well as industry, ensure the shift to renewable energy is long-term and do not revert to traditional fossil fuel once the COVID-19 situation has settled down? Renewable energy tends to be viewed as a hype rather than long-term solution to climate change. And I think this will also somehow touch the issue of the economic consideration. And I think in the case of Indonesia, we have this issue of power purchase agreement for the renewable energy, Pak Paul. So I think I would like to start with Pak Paul first then. So please, Pak.
Yes, this is very interesting question actually. As I mentioned in my response before, we have let's say as METI, Indonesian Renewable Energy Society, we have let's say promote the establishment of renewable energy law for the long-term thinking actually. So because by having a kind of law, we have all the basis to really move towards the renewable energy in the future. Having said that, all in this in the law that we have proposed last time, we include issues like thinking about from the planning from the government. That's the national energy policy, translating the national energy policy to let's say up to business plan of PLN, also moving also towards the let's say procurement by allowing the private sector also to be included in the supply chains for the renewable energy. We have seen, for example, that some regulations is still needed to be improved. For example, there was a question as well here. In the remote area, there was a regulation number 38 in 2016 related to the, let's say, off-grid applications. But there was a problem with releasing the business area of PLN. This is one of the problems why, for example, off-grid application has not been, let's say, implemented that much. But having said that, we really need to really end-to-end from planning up to, let's say, power purchase agreement. In the power purchase agreement, for example, that we had in 2017, the risk has been moved too much on the side of the project developers, so that when it comes to the financing, the financing institution say, oh, the project, your PPA is not bankable. So we would not get a kind of, let's say, a project finance for financing the project. So if you still want to do the project, then you really have to put really huge amount of money as asset collateral. It might be your housing, your, let's say, mother-in-law's house and so on. But in the value about 110% of the value of the debt. So this is that we are now trying to, let's say, promote to the government. We let's say discuss with the government that if we really want to move towards energy transition, low carbon, and implementing renewable energy projects, then you really have to touch all the issues from the top up to the micro thing.
Thank you, Pak Paul. Pak Dida, you want to add to this? Unmute yourself first, Pak. Sorry.
Yeah, I already mentioned that government still commit to reduce emissions. of course, with this situation, pandemic, we have to adjust all the programs, but the main program, we still promoting renewable energy. For example, like in fuel, we now entering the final step of our program to promote D100. So the diesel come from the biodiesel, sorry, and also for waste management. Just week or 2 weeks ago, we just make refuse derived fuel for waste management in Cilacap, and also for land sector. We are very near to disburse the money from Norwegian through RED Plus program. So we will continue all the policy and program for promoting low carbon development. But for the target and the other things, we still ongoing discussion. But the most important, the government of Indonesia still have a fully commitment for emission gases, greenhouse gases reduction. Yeah.
Thanks, Pak Dida. Maybe I'll come to Rob first and then John. Rob?
One of the opportunities that COVID is giving us, and I'll take it back down to business perspective here, is that it's obviously had a massive impact on people's lives, and there is serious harm being done. But I'd like to raise the point now about who is actually being impacted by COVID and how that relates to climate change. And Cookie, you mentioned also at the beginning, we've got a gender imbalance here. There's a gender imbalance in the effects of COVID-19 and how it affects people across the community. And it's affecting households in different ways as well. So the response in terms of climate change needs to factor in that differential effect, because in climate change, we also have a differential effect. It's the low socioeconomic groups potentially that are going to be most impacted. So when we're talking about a recovery plan, the policies at the government level need to include these ideas about who's actually going to be affected. And it's actually transcending ideology, because it's interesting how the system approach or system unraveling has occurred, and that ideologies have some ideologies have to have been let go to be able to provide government assistance in Australia, and that has also provided opportunities for government intervention, but also at the same time, I think that may provide opportunities with climate change and recovery together because of that relaxation of ideology and the understanding of the interconnectedness of the economic system. If you have one effect in one area, it's going to trickle down to households and have an effect to females and childcare. And what does that mean for people's productivity? So it's those sort of system things, I think, that has to be thought of at the top level. And COVID's providing an opportunity firsthand for governments to wake up about this.
Yes, I agree. A Liberal National Party government in Australia believes in small government and low regulation and market processes. And in fact, the response to COVID has required them to leave that ideology and to deal with an issue which is very significant. It's seen a very large expansion in the scale and influence of government, budget deficits of orders of magnitude we haven't seen at least since the war, if not longer. In that context, they've had to worry about some of the social dimensions as well. Some of what Rob's been talking about, the differential impact, the inequality that's created by some of the responses, and they've had to deal with it, particularly about the unemployed and those who prospectively will be longer term unemployed. as well as the age in terms of their accommodation, and they're more exposed and more at risk, and nothing had been done in thinking about that either. So it has brought a change of attitude, which you should be able to capitalise on in designing a response to COVID. The final point I'd say is it's also seeing a lot of change in business attitudes. Investors, big asset owners are driving the fossil fuel companies and those who invest in them to change their policies. You're seeing that with our big superannuation industry, for example, and the management of climate risk. And I see proposals in countries like Canada to tie executive remuneration, particularly bonuses, to the capacity of the company to reduce emissions. That's a way of focusing the mind. When the governments are often, in Australia at least, criticised for just looking after the top end of town, this is a way to ensure that they have an incentive to do more than that.
Oh, thanks so much. So I think that's somehow linked with the next question that we have here. And I'm sure this question, we cannot just answer it here now, but it's also a good one for us to start thinking about maybe collaborative research on this. The question is whether we still can implement the low carbon plan in the near time or the near future, like during the pandemic, and taking the opportunity of new investment from abroad as Indonesian economic growth is declining at the moment. And what is it, the pros and cons, especially for the community with low income or working in the informal sector? I think somehow Rob and John touched about it a bit as well. And I know, Leah, for me, it will be a very interesting area to work on a collaborative research among, researchers in the country. So I think I would like to start with John first then.
About collaborative research in particular?
Both, I think it's both on the potential for collaborative research, but also do you see that with the declining economy, that country, both Indonesia and Australia, still can implement low carbon plan for the near future?
Well, I don't think we've had much choice in Australia but to do what we've done, and I'm sure the position's similar in Indonesia. We had to close our borders because that's our greatest exposure, our international borders. That's our greatest exposure. And we had some of the early infection from the virus coming basically from offshore tourists and Australians returning home and cruise ships and things like that. But now we've moved on to a situation where we have community transmission domestically. And that's a very big feature in Victoria, for example, where they've got well over 2,000 cases where the source of the infection is still a mystery. Although they're doing contact tracing and so on, it's very difficult for every one person that gets it. Maybe the 10 are at risk, so that 2,000 becomes 20,000 very quickly and very hard to trace. And they've also found that people who'd had their tests in Victoria, say 3,000 tests in one day, to be found to have the COVID-19. Then when they were told to go home and self-isolate, lockdown for 2 weeks, 800 of those when visited weren't at home. So that people aren't adhering to the rules. So the lockdown in principle is one solution that's been enforced, but it's difficult to enforce when people don't accept their responsibility in that respect. And so this is a very difficult, and I'm sure it's much more difficult in Indonesia, given the size of your population, the concentration of population. I mean, we still have problems with social distancing. I just looked at the Prime Minister's press conference this morning in Canberra, and all the media are in a scrum. And he's talking social distancing. It's very difficult to get people to make that transition. But there's a lot of lessons there that I think if you do lock down that and you hold it like New Zealand has done, you won't eradicate it, but you'll reduce risk of community transmission, which does move you forward. And as long as you're locked down, though, your point, the harder the impact on the economy, the greater the social and economic disruption. But you can't really trade off at the margin, as Trump pretends to do. End up with just chaos and a crisis of unequal proportions.
All right. Thanks so much, Rob.
Yeah, I think John's right there about the people's responses in that situation. And I'll just go back to that point I made about the economic system and the quite often, not all economists, so many economists treat jobs in a particular sector over here and jobs in that sector. But what the pandemic has done is to show that that making an intervention in one area, albeit a health intervention, has effects elsewhere. And if you don't understand the system correctly, people will not adhere to that. So the 800 people may be that some of those people were not responsible, but it may be that they had to go to work. And it's only recently that, the people have been seen to, well, a lot of people in Australia have been calling for some of the cracks in policy to be tightened so that people don't fall through the cracks. So therefore they've introduced measures to try and, that safety net of people to make sure that they do the responsible thing. So I think that system approach, I think that's going to have a dramatic effect on policy in Australia. And then the other thing I think in Australia that's coming from this is the notion of evidence and science. And that's going to have an effect on how we respond to climate change. And using evidence-based policy and bringing that back, because in Australia, our policies and our political system has been described very much in terms of a poll-driven politics as opposed to a policy-driven politics. So I think there's going to be a bit of a shift here in Australia, well, I'm hoping at least, in terms of policy and system understanding.
What it's forced the government to do when low incomers and casuals have been disadvantaged by having to have a test and having to stay home, the government's had to respond now with pandemic leave, fund pandemic leave to some extent. It was a crack in the system. People didn't have any choice. They had to go to work in order to, to live from one week to the next. And it's always been a feature of the lower income, some migrant communities, lower incomes, casual workers in Australia. And it's a gap that they've been able to ignore when the economy's been booming. And we've had nearly 30 years of sustained growth without a recession. So this is a shock. You've got to be in your late 40s to remember a recession, I think, in Australia. So, it is going to perhaps improve our social security system as well as our health system. But the disruption has been significant.
All right, thanks. Pak Paul, before I come to Pak Dida.
Actually, I have to admit, I missed the questions. I'm parallelly having a discussion on promoting the solar PV in North Sumatra right now. So
say whatever you like then.
That's the beauty of the online meeting. You can participate in more than one meeting at the same time. Sorry, I missed the question. So if Pak Dida answered that would be okay.
Yeah. Okay, then maybe I'll just come to Pak Dida and then because we need to end our session as well. So Pak Dida, how is it like whether the government will be able to still implement the low carbon development plan even though we have like a deficit in our budget now? So please, Pak.
Sorry.
Yes, please.
Okay, we still have a fully commitment for implementing low carbon development. Yeah, as already mentioned, we're still promoting our fuel. We now entering the final state of our research for B100 biodiesel 100. So, and others for solid waste management, we still want to implement the thermal process in 12 cities at least. In land sector, as already mentioned, start with the Norwegian RED Plus funding. We still continue to conserve, to manage sustainably our forests. And also we now also engage to exercise Article 6 with several institutions. So if the Article 6 agreed in the UNFCCC's forum, we are already ready. So and other, yeah, we still continue with other organization like OECD promoting clean energy, and other, of course, institution with World Bank, ADB. So we still continue, but of course we have to adjust with the situation. The health sector will be the come first, the social safety nets, and also to promote the medium, small scale, micro enterprises. Yeah, but yeah, we still commit for promoting low carbon development. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Pak Dida. Yes, please, Pak Paul.
If I may respond to your last questions, where government still could still implement the low carbon.
Yeah.
Of course. For example, one of the issue in the energy sector is actually on the pricing. So, for example, we follow suit what have been done in other countries. Let's say having a kind of reverse auction for large-scale solar PV. Last time we have let's say bidding for solar PV 2 times 25 megawatt in Bali. We got already the result 5.8 US cent per kilowatt hour and 6.2. And if we make a bigger bidding, for example, 100 mega, 200 megawatt, and so on, I think the price could be drive down. So even would not cost anything to the government. It will even save the money. I think that could be one of the options. The other option will be, as I mentioned, I'm participating in the other webinar. What we have promoted right now is actually implementing this solar rooftop in the industrial estate. So as what we have mentioned in the proposal of METI is, why don't, for example, put a kind of restriction or let's say promoting the use of renewable energy in the industrial estate. The reason being is because we need to lower our emissions, the product emissions of the product produced in the industrial estate, if they want to export that to other countries. By having that reduction, it will let's say have bigger acceptability of the Indonesian product in the international market, and that's actually what we have promoted quite a lot. The moving towards renewable energy doesn't mean actually always becomes a burden to government. For example, investing in hydro project is not as expensive as people thought. We have seen, for example, that if we read the statistic of PLN in 2018, the diesel power plant, the diesel operational cost is about 2,200 per kilowatt hour. So easily can be beaten by renewable energy. And in that report also, it mentioned about the operational cost of the gas turbine. So it is more than 5,000. So renewable energy can beat that. So government can save by implementing renewable energy. So that the only problem is actually how to, let's say, properly design a policy and regulations that can, let's say, attract investors to invest in such energy sector. And that's actually the purpose of the establishment of the presidential regulations and the bill on renewable energy. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, Pak Paul. Very, very useful information. So we have to come to our end of this session. Before I pass through the microphone to Leah, I just want to invite, I think starting from John, and then Rob, Pak Paul, and then Pak Dida, to share, like, for 1 minute max, your takeaway from this session. So be it on the potential collaboration or whatever. So please, John, and then Rob.
My position is very simple. I think that, the saying in Australia is you never waste a good crisis. And this is one that's caused us to move quite quickly and decisively in so many ways and to change our behaviour in so many ways. And it's a unique opportunity, therefore, to rethink about what we've been doing and how we've been doing it. And there is an imperative for the globe to move to a low-carbon society by the middle part of this century. And the sooner we do that, the better off we'll all be. I think the advantage of working with somebody like Indonesia is we can share experiences. I mean, you may be coming from quite a different set of perspectives. And as we've said, you understand planning, Australia doesn't, but we can learn a lot from that. But having said that, I think there are a lot of joint exercises we could do that to make it worthwhile. And,
Okay.
Sharing experiences will accelerate the process.
Thanks so much, John. Rob?
Yeah, firstly, thanks very much for the opportunity to speak today. And I just shared my details on the chat line there. So if anyone wants to follow up with any emails, quite happy to respond to that. I think my takeaway and my message would be that the system approach that the pandemic has made us think about will be hugely beneficial to think about not only just a response to make sure our economies get back on track, but also question the nature of growth and growth for who. And I think that will lead to not necessarily just a sign of government intervention. Massive government intervention can make changes across society, which we can transfer to climate change, but the very nature of thinking about the economy as a system and who is actually being affected by this, I think that opens up many doors in terms of future policies. And like John said, it's been great to be here, and look forward to more collaborations as we have been doing over the last couple of years, and hope to keep going.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Rob. Paul?
Yes, I think that's first is great opportunity to speak here, discuss with John and Rob and Dida, and when it comes to the low carbon, actually, this is even a timely that we really need to consider to move towards low carbon during the COVID, because we see that there are a lot of things that could be done in order to really move the economy towards low carbon. In the energy sector especially, we have seen the impact if the policy and regulation is established properly, then the movement towards low carbon is really possible and can achieve significant result in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Dida, your takeaway, please unmute yourself. Thanks, Pa.
Okay, yeah. Low carbon development, I think, is now this is our mandate and also obligation from constitution level up to our act and government regulation. So I think the question is how to do the best one. So we very welcome inputs and potential collaboration from all stakeholders, because first thing first, we have to cope with the pandemic, and then this is the century event, so there is no much have experience of this, so we have to collaborate all stakeholders how to cope in line with the still promoting low carbon development. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. So thanks to all speakers, this is the end of my role here. I would just like to pass it through to Leah. So please, Leah.
Thank you, Mbak Kuki. Wonderful sharing you have done, and great insights by the speakers as well. Thank you, Pak Dida, Pak Paul, John, and Rob, who has just left, for a great discussion. And we don't forget that we have the polling already, and then I will share the results. So could you see the polling result there? And for the viewers from YouTube, I would share the slides presentations that I just put it quickly together. So there you go. Which sector do you most identify yourself with? So most of you are from academia, 48%, followed by 24% from national government, and then 8% local government, 7% private sectors, 5% NGO, 6% community, and 2% media. So this is, and this is out of 483 people who voted. So it's a good number. Second question is, what do you think the impact of COVID-19 pandemic to the low carbon future? 61% said it has a positive impact to the low carbon development plan. 5% say it has no impact at all. 16% say it has a negative impact to the low carbon development plan. And 19% say, I don't know. Next question, do you think we should increase our investment in renewable energy for economic recovery after the pandemic? 91% say yes, 1% say no, 9% say I don't know. Do you think we should accelerate the transition to clean and renewable energy? 94% say yes, 2% say no, 5% say I don't know. So that's the result of the polling for today's session. We will send it to the participants and then also the panelists if you wish. And it was a great discussion. And then now I would also like to remind the participants as well. Thank you, by the way, for joining until the end of the session. We have a good follow-up on Zoom and then also on YouTube. For those of you who wish to download the materials by the speakers, we will share it through our Google Drive account, which will be shared by Hendika later, the link. It is in our Facebook page, the Institute for Sustainable Earth and Resources Facebook page. So you could just go there and then download the materials. For those of you who want certificate, Hendika will share the link after this, and then you should fill that in with the timeline, with the time limit, and then we will send you the certificate. And for those of you who are joining, we will still staying in this theme, the low carbon future, until the next 2 weeks. For next week, stay tuned. We will be conducting webinar with the title, The Impact of COVID-19 on SDG, Sustainable Development Goals Process. So I hope to see you all there again. And one more time, I would like to say massive thank you for the chair, Mbak Kuki, and then all the speakers, Pak Dida, Pak Paul, John, and Rob, and then Pak Yatna. Is Pak Yatna still here? And Prof. Kathleen, are you still here? Yeah, so Pak Yatna and Prof. Kathleen. Hello, Prof. You mind to say a few words? Sorry, just like to shock you like that.
Selamat pagi, and terima kasih, Leah, Makuki, and all our speakers. John, fantastic to have you joining from Australia as well. This has been a fabulous discussion, and really the key for me is how we have to make the most of the opportunity we have and not waste that opportunity. So thank you all for your insights. Really appreciate it. And the discussion on the side has been going crazy. So fantastic to see so many people so inspired about making some transformative change going forward. Thank you. Terima kasih, Leah.
Terima kasih sekali, Prof. Kathleen. So Prof. Kathleen is really fluent in Indonesian, and so next up she will present in Indonesian. All right, then. So again, thank you very much, participants and everyone. See you next week, and I hope you enjoy the webinar. I'm Leah Zakia, Program Coordinator for CAIPSDCC, the Collaborative Australia-Indonesia Program on Sustainable Development and Climate Change. So hopefully this discussion will be turned into a research collaboration or other actions that can help the government to have a low-carbon future development. So bye. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks,
Thanks
Cookie.
so much. Thanks.
See you, Pak Dida.
Yeah, thank you, Kathleen.
Yeah. So you, the speakers now can leave. I will and I will just online for a few minutes for the certificates. Thank you, everyone.
Oke,
Thanks so
makasih
much.
Leah, Kuki.
Makasih ya.
Thank
Iya,
you,
sama-sama.
Terima kasih.
Andika, YouTube-nya di Stop. Oh, untuk ini ya. Oke, then. Then I will just leave. Terima kasih Pak Yatna.
Terima kasih, sama-sama.
Hendrika will stay here for a few minutes. I will leave. So see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
Bapak Ibu, for e-certificate request, you could fill the link I have just shared via the screen and also in the chat box. There is two alternative link for e-certificate request. You could choose one from the two. It's the same link, but it's the same form, but a different link for just in case. Thank you very much for Bapak Ibu who have joined us today. I will still wait for some time for those who will need e-certificate. If you have any problems, you could contact me via the numbers, WhatsApp, which is mentioned in the YouTube description or in the our broadcast messages. Thank you Bapak Ibu. Terima kasih Bapak Ibu. Untuk materi bisa saya kirimkan melalui email, namun akan bersamaan itu dengan pengiriman link download sertifikat. Bila Bapak Ibu membutuhkan materinya lebih cepat, akan lebih mudah dengan mendownload langsung dari link yang ada di postingan terbaru Facebook ISER. Bapak Ibu, thank you very much for joining. I will close the room in 11:55. If you have any problems, you could contact me via CAIPSDCC email or via WhatsApp, which could be found in the broadcast messages or in the video description if you are in YouTube. Thank you very much, Bapak Ibu, for joining, and I will hope to see you again in the next webinar. See you.